Those roots are so thick, and you'd like to put some flowers, some shrubs, some things like that out there, but you simply can't dig a hole because the roots are so thick. The way that I've gotten around that problem is to dig a very shallow hole, maybe, down about this far, and then take a clay pot or a ceramic pot or something like that that has a hole in the bottom and sink that pot down maybe an inch or two in the ground. That's all you have to do. And when you first put your plants in there, and incidentally it'd be a good idea if you do plan to leave them there all the time, to drill 2 or 3 extra holes in the bottom of the pot. And the plant, at first you'll have to treat it like a plant growing in a container. But those roots will go right through the bottom and into the soil, and you can take a plant that maybe it's in a 3-gallon or a 5-gallon container, a hole that you would never have been able to dig down through that root system. But you're getting it just far enough down into the ground that it's going to stay moist, and you'll be amazed how quickly those roots will go right through the hole in the bottom of the pot and establish itself very, very well. You've solved the drainage problem. You don't ever have to worry about the plant staying too wet. Once the roots get down into the ground, you're not going to have to water real regularly. At first, yeah, you may have to water every couple of days like you would something that stays in a pot, but once you get the roots down to soil level, they're going to get all the moisture they need from the water underneath, and it's no extra watering or anything. And you can have a beautiful garden of flowers or perennials or even green things like holly fern and aspidistra, things that you wouldn't have been able to dig a hole to plant. And the containers can be quite attractive, set out underneath the trees. So it's pretty easy way to solve the problem of having too many roots to deal with. Like always, if you have questions, stop me as we go.
The
Yes,
container have to be a special one?
No.
It can be plastic, or it can have to be terracotta?
If it's plastic, choose one that's fairly dark colored, because white plastic tends to deteriorate much more quickly, tends to become very brittle. But if you get the green or even some of the terracotta colored ones that are a little bit more UV protected, well, it works just fine. I like terracotta pots and ceramic pots better because they tend to stay in place a little bit better. They're easier to steal, or harder to steal in other words.
But they are more expensive.
They're certainly more expensive. Yeah. Spend your money on plants, get cheap pots.
Can you drill holes in a terracotta pot?
Oh, absolutely. You put a masonry bit, and it's, knock on wood, I bet you I've drilled 10,000 pots and I've never broken one. Yeah. Masonry bit, it'll be a shiny, looks like steel, but the end of it has what looks like 2 little blades on it, same thing you use drilling concrete. I judge how well fired a pot is by how hard it is to drill. Standard clay pot like that, I'll go through that with a masonry bit in 15 seconds. It's very, very easy to drill. And same thing's true with white clay pots that come out of Arkansas. You get the reduction fired stoneware, you're going to work a lot harder to drill a pot like this. And again, I always judge the quality by how hard it is to drill, because when they are really well fired, I had a pot like this one time and it took me almost 20 minutes to get a hole drilled into the bottom of it. So believe me, those are tough pots. I won't say they're unbreakable, but they'll stand up to a hailstorm or anything else. But again, there are just so many little things occur. If you're drilling a really hard pot, start with a small masonry bit, maybe a 3/8 inch bit, and then if you need to enlarge it, drill that as a pilot hole, and then come back with your 1/2 inch or 5/8 inch bit and enlarge that hole. Small hole drills a whole lot easier than a big one, but again, be sure that you've got the right kind of bit, and you can drill any of these pots without really any problem in the world.
All right, what kind of plants would you put in there when it's really shady and it's not getting any sun?
When it's really shady, you can put Mexican heather, grows in fairly deep shade and blooms. Shrimp plant is one of the most satisfactory plants that blooms almost all the time. If it's bright but no direct sun, you can put plumbago in a pot like that. If you want pretty foliages, hosta. Hostas.
We could grow a hosta here.
Oh, hostas grow beautifully here.
Oh, really?
Your biggest problem with hostas is keeping the snails and slugs away from them. So you will put out a little bit of slug. Yeah, by the way, don't ever use bug bait. Bug bait is so toxic that a teaspoon's enough to kill a small dog. The Sluggo is an iron phosphate product which works just as well killing snails and slugs, but is totally harmless to your pets. But hostas are gorgeous. Now, if you've ever lived in England or you've lived in the Northeast, our hostas don't grow as well. But there's some hostas up here, up underneath this little arbor up here. Those were grown right here in San Antonio. And you can see they do absolutely beautifully.
You had mentioned, was it a miniature plumbago or something for a ground cover?
They call it dwarf plumbago. It is not a plumbago at all, but the flowers look kind of like plumbago. So somebody came up with the idea of dwarf plumbago.
Is it good for shade?
Grows in shade or sun. I water mine once or twice a year. Blooms with a gorgeous dark blue flower. Botanically, it's called Ceratostigma, which I guess is why they call it dwarf plumbago. The other name for it is leadwort. If you wherever they come up with that name, I don't know, but it's leadwort is a common name you'll see in some garden books. But it has beautiful fall color, turns beautiful orange red, freezes to the ground, and then comes back every year.
Can you mix it in without a ground cover?
You can, but I think it will probably dominate eventually. It's very vigorous in its growth.
Because my Asiatic jasmine is not covering the way it should.
Has it been there for a while?
Yes, some of it about 4 years.
Okay, you need to be fertilizing a little bit more.
Okay.
The old saying that I'm sure you've heard me say about ground covers, the first year they sleep, the second year they creep, the third year they leap. And back in the days when I did landscaping, I always told people when we put an Asiatic, you're going to hate it the first 2 years, so don't call me. I'm warning you right now. If by the third year it doesn't look good, then you can call me. I never heard from anybody. It's slow to get started, but once it's started, it does extremely well.
That's what I keep hearing, but it's just not, I keep putting
Probably,
more plants.
You
all
probably
the time.
need more fertilizer.
More fertilizer.
Yeah, just get something like that Medina granular.
Medina.
Feed it every 6 weeks.
Oh,
But,
okay.
yeah, a little more fertilizer. That's a nice thing too about ground covers, and I guess that's sort of a natural segue into areas that are too shady to grow grass. What is this thing that everybody thinks you have to have grass from this fence to this fence, from the house to back here? If there's any big change that we need to make in our landscaping habits around here for water conservation as much as anything, it's to plant less grass. To me, the modern landscape should be maybe 15 or 20% grass, not 85% grass. And the single most common problem that I see with grass is where people have a yard that is simply too shady to grow grass. And St. Augustine is our most drought or most shade tolerant grass, but there is such a thing as too shady. And it amazes me how people will put down sod and it dies. So they put down some more sod and it dies. So they put down, hey, good morning. They put down some more sod and then it dies. There are places that it is simply too shady to grow grass. And you have a choice. If you want to put plants there, there are a lot of fun plants that will tolerate the shade as a ground cover. Asiatic jasmine is one. Dwarf monkey grass. If you want something that looks like grass, plant dwarf monkey grass. It's dark green, only gets about this tall. Put some stepping stones if it's an area that you walk so that you're not tramping it down all the time. But it makes a beautiful ground cover, and you're just going to be, if the area is really shady, you're never going to like the grass there. It may survive, but it's not going to be thick and beautiful. And I like things that are thick and beautiful. There are a lot of other things you can plant out there too. If you want to grow plants, you can, well, we'll actually a little later this spring do a special seminar just on gardening in shady areas. But you can plant aspidistra, you can plant holly fern. If it's bright, but not direct sun, you can plant things like, for color, you can plant begonias and impatiens, you can plant caladiums and coleus. Another thing I did want to mention for the pots in a shady area, somebody asked about the variegated ginger. If you're looking for a little bit bigger plant, variegated ginger is gorgeous, and it'll get this tall, it'll get this big around in a single season. And it's very happy in the shade, and you can put that. Now again, I would definitely do that where you sink the pot down a little bit, because it's going to want to get its roots through the pot and down into the soil underneath to have adequate moisture. But again, when you're looking out at that area and it looks dull and boring because it's too shady or because you can't dig a hole, there are ways around that. And gosh, a house I lived in one time, I had Algerian ivy as a ground cover, and it was just boring dark green. And I wasn't putting things to stay out there year round, but every summer I'd take all the bromeliads out of my small greenhouse and just dot them around out through the ivy, and it turned what